After 20 years of serving his country in ways he could never talk about, David finally hung up his boots. The missions were classified, the locations were secret, and the work was dangerous. But now, at 42, he was ready for something different. He wanted to watch his kids grow up, have dinner with his wife every night, and maybe fix up an old car in the garage on weekends. His wife Rachel found the perfect house in a neighborhood called Oak Ridge Hills. It looked like something out of a magazine. Clean streets, perfectly trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes, and neighbors waving at each other. After years of living on military bases and temporary housing, this felt like the American dream they'd been working toward. The moving truck pulled up on a sunny Saturday morning. Their two kids, 10-year-old Jake and 7-year-old Lily, were already arguing about who got which bedroom. David smiled as he carried boxes inside. This was exactly what he wanted. Normal, peaceful, boring even. By Monday afternoon, David found an envelope in his mailbox. It wasn't a welcome card. It was a violation notice from the HOA. Apparently, his mailbox was painted the wrong shade of black. He looked at his mailbox, then at his neighbor's mailbox. They looked identical. He shrugged it off. Maybe it was just a mistake. Tuesday brought another notice. His lawn edging was a 1/4 inch too high. David measured it himself. It was exactly at the 2-inch maximum specified in the HOA guidelines. He'd made sure of it when he did the edging that morning. Wednesday's notice said he'd violated the parking rules. His truck had been in the driveway for 25 minutes while he unloaded groceries and helped Rachel set up the kitchen. The rule stated vehicles couldn't be parked in driveways for more than 15 minutes during daytime hours. Each violation came with a fine. $50 for the mailbox, $75 for the lawn, $100 for the parking violation. David sat at his kitchen table that night looking at the notices. $225 in 3 days for things that seemed completely unreasonable. Rachel leaned over his shoulder. This can't be right. Maybe you should go talk to them. The HOA office was located in a small building near the neighborhood entrance. David walked in Thursday morning and found himself face to face with Donald Kramer, the HOA president. Kramer was a large man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place for a suburban HOA office. He had slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Reed, what can I do for you?" Kramer asked, not looking up from his computer. David placed the 3 notices on the desk. "I think there's been some kind of mistake with these violations. I'd like to discuss them." Kramer finally looked up, his smile widening. "No mistake. We have very high standards here in Oak Ridge Hills. That's what keeps property values up." "My mailbox is the same color as everyone else's," David said calmly. "Our inspector disagrees. It's clearly off by several shades. And the lawn edging? I measured it myself. It's exactly 2 inches. Kramer leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Reed, are you calling our inspector a liar?" "I'm saying there might be an error. The fines stand. If you don't pay within 30 days, they double. And if you continue to accumulate violations, we can place a lien on your property." Kramer's tone was friendly, but his eyes were cold. "I suggest you pay up and learn how things work around here." David left the office feeling like he'd just been threatened, though Kramer hadn't said anything directly hostile. It was the tone, the implication. He'd seen it before in people who enjoyed having power over others. That weekend, David decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting. Maybe if he addressed the board directly, they'd be more reasonable. The meeting was held in the community center, and about 20 residents showed up. Kramer sat at the head table with 4 other board members. David noticed that most of the residents sat quietly, avoiding eye contact with the board. When it came time for resident comments, David stood up. "I'm David Reed, new to the neighborhood. I've received 3 violation notices in my first week, and I believe they're unfair. I'd like the board to review them." Kramer's smile was sharp. "Mr. Reed, everyone thinks their violations are unfair. That's why we have trained inspectors and clear guidelines." "Guidelines I followed," David said. "I'm happy to show measurements, photos." "Are you suggesting our inspector falsified reports?" Kramer interrupted. His voice had an edge now. "Because that's a serious accusation." "I'm saying there's a mistake." "What I hear," Kramer said, speaking over him, "is a new resident who thinks the rules don't apply to him. Who thinks he can just move in and do whatever he wants." He looked around the room. "We've worked hard to build this community. We don't need people coming in and undermining our standards." David felt the eyes of other residents on him. Some looked sympathetic, but most looked away. No one spoke up in his defense. The board voted unanimously to uphold all 3 violations. Kramer smiled at David. "Anything else, Mr. Reed?" David sat down, his jaw tight. He'd faced enemy combatants, survived firefights, and conducted operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But he'd never felt quite like this casual abuse of petty power, this public humiliation over a mailbox color. After the meeting, an older woman approached him in the parking lot. She looked nervous, glancing around before speaking quietly. "I'm sorry about what happened in there," she said. "Kramer does this to everyone. My husband and I have lived here 12 years. Last year they fined us for having the wrong flowers in our garden. Cost us $800 in fines before we replanted everything." "Why doesn't anyone stand up to him?" David asked. She shook her head. "People have tried. They get buried in violations. One family had to sell their house because they couldn't keep up with the fines. It's easier to just go along." She hurried to her car before David could ask anything else. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Kramer's smirk, the way the other board members followed his lead without question, and the fear in that woman's eyes. Something was wrong here. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA. This felt calculated, deliberate. Rachel found him in the kitchen at 2 a.m, looking at the HOA guidelines. "Come to bed," she said softly. "Something's not right about this, Rach. The way Kramer acted, the way everyone's afraid of him. It feels like..." He trailed off. "Like what?" "Like an operation. Like organized intimidation." Rachel sat down beside him. "What are you going to do?" David looked at the violation notices spread across the table. He'd spent 2 decades dealing with threats. He knew the difference between bureaucratic incompetence and something more sinister. And every instinct he'd honed over those years was telling him that Donald Kramer was running something much bigger than an HOA. "I'm going to find out what's really going on here," he said. He just had no idea how dangerous that decision would turn out to be. The violations didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. The next week, David received 4 more notices. His trash can had been visible from the street for 6 minutes past the allowed time. His son's bicycle was improperly stored on their front porch. A garden hose was left out overnight. His car was parked 3 inches over the edge of his driveway pad. Each violation came with escalating fines. 75, 100, 150. David took photos of everything, documenting the exact positions, the timestamps, the measurements. His neighbor's trash can stayed out for 2 hours. No violation. Another neighbor had bikes, toys, and lawn equipment scattered across their porch. No violation. It was targeted. Personal. Rachel was getting worried. "David, this is already over $2,000. Maybe we should just pay it and move on." "It won't stop," David said, spreading his documentation across the kitchen table. "Look at this pattern. They're going after us specifically. If we pay, it just proves the system works. They'll keep coming." He'd started talking to other neighbors carefully, casually. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Old Mr. Chen, 3 houses down, had been fined $12,000 over 2 years. He'd eventually sold his house at a loss and moved in with his daughter. The Johnsons, a young couple with a baby, had racked up $8,000 in violations and were struggling to pay. But here's what really caught David's attention. Several neighbors mentioned that Kramer had approached them privately, offering to settle their fines for cash payments, usually about half of what they owed. The payments were made in cash, and according to those who'd paid, they never saw any official receipts or records showing the fines were cleared. David had spent enough time in intelligence work to recognize what this looked like. Kramer was generating violations, creating debt, and then pocketing settlement payments that never made it into official HOA records. It was extortion dressed up in official paperwork. He spent his evenings going through public records, HOA meeting minutes, financial reports, board member backgrounds. Kramer had been president for 6 years. Before that, he'd been investigated for fraud related to a property management company he'd run in another state. Charges were dropped on a technicality. The current HOA board consisted entirely of people Kramer had appointed after the previous board members mysteriously resigned. The HOA's finances showed huge discrepancies. Violation fine income was listed at about $30,000 a year, but actual bank deposits were less than half that. Where was the rest going? David was putting together a case. He had documentation, witness statements, financial records, but he needed more before going to authorities. He needed proof that couldn't be explained away. 3 weeks after moving in, David received a notice that he was being fined $500 for unauthorized exterior modifications. His crime? Hanging a wreath on his front door. That afternoon, he drove to the HOA office. Kramer was there, sitting behind his desk, looking almost pleased to see him. "Mr. Reed, still having trouble following the rules?" David placed a folder on the desk. "I've been reviewing the HOA bylaws. According to Section 12, Paragraph 4, seasonal decorations are permitted on doors and windows. A wreath qualifies." Kramer didn't even look at the folder. "The board interprets what qualifies. The board or you? Is there a difference?" Kramer's smile was cold. David leaned forward slightly. "I've been documenting every violation, Mr. Kramer. I've been comparing my citations to what other residents do without consequences. I've been talking to people, and I've been looking at HOA finances." The smile faded from Kramer's face. "Be very careful, Mr. Reed. I've noticed some interesting patterns. Violations that seem targeted, settlement offers that don't appear in official records, money that doesn't add up." Kramer stood up slowly. He was a big man, and he used his size deliberately, moving around the desk to stand close to David. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work. This is a good neighborhood because we maintain standards, because we don't let troublemakers disrupt our community." "Is that what you call people who ask questions? Troublemakers?" "I call them people who need to learn their place." Kramer's voice dropped lower. "You have a nice family, Mr. Reed, pretty wife, cute kids. It would be a shame if you made life difficult for them here, if they felt unwelcome. If other families didn't want their children playing with yours because your family has a reputation for causing problems." David felt something cold settle in his chest. It had been years since someone had threatened his family, even indirectly. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That sounded a lot like a threat, Mr. Kramer. Just friendly advice, from someone who's been here longer." Kramer smiled again. "Pay your fines, Mr. Reed, follow the rules, or things will get much more difficult for you." David left without another word. As he drove home, his hands were completely steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. Kramer had just made a critical mistake. He'd shown his hand. He'd made it personal. That evening, David set up better security cameras around his property. He'd been planning to do it anyway, but now it was a priority. He positioned them to capture not just his house, but the street, the sidewalk, and any vehicles that might pass by. He also made copies of all his documentation and sent them to a secure cloud storage. Whatever happened next, the evidence would be safe. The next morning, he woke to find his car's tires slashed. All 4 of them. The security cameras showed a figure in a hoodie approaching around 3 in the morning, but the face wasn't visible. David called the police. They took a report, said it was probably random vandalism. They'd keep an eye out. It wasn't random. David knew it wasn't random. 2 days later, someone spray-painted profanity across his garage door. The cameras caught another hooded figure, different build from the first one. Again, no clear face shot. Rachel was scared now. "David, maybe we should just pay the fines and drop this. It's not worth it. If we back down now, they win, and they'll keep doing this to other people." He held her hands. "Trust me. I've dealt with worse than Donald Kramer." But that night, lying in bed, David wondered if he was making the right call. He'd faced enemies before, but never in his own neighborhood. Never with his family directly in the crosshairs. The following week brought the most expensive violation yet. $1,500 for maintaining a nuisance property. The reasons listed were vague and contradictory. The grass was too long in some areas and too short in others. His house paint was faded. His driveway had oil stains. David measured his grass. It was within specifications. His house paint was less than 2 years old. The oil stains were barely visible spots that every driveway in the neighborhood had. He went back to the HOA office. Kramer wasn't there, but one of the board members was. A nervous man named Peterson who avoided eye contact. "I need to speak with Kramer," David said. "He's not available." "When will he be available?" Peterson shuffled papers on his desk. "I don't know. He's a busy man." David studied him for a moment. Peterson was sweating despite the air conditioning. "You know what he's doing is illegal, right? When this comes out, and it will come out, everyone involved is going down, board members included." Peterson's hand shook slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. David kept his voice calm, almost gentle. You're not like him. I can see that. You're just scared, but staying silent makes you complicit. When the authorities get involved, they won't care that you were afraid. You should leave, Peterson said, but his voice cracked. David left his card on the desk. When you're ready to talk, call me. I can help protect you if you help me stop this. He walked out knowing he'd planted a seed. Peterson was weak and weak links could break. That afternoon, David was in his backyard when his neighbor, Tom, from 2 doors down, came over. Tom was a construction worker, good guy, they'd talked a few times. Hey, David, got a minute? Sure, what's up? Tom looked uncomfortable. Look, I like you, man. You seem like good people. But I gotta tell you something. Kramer's been asking around about you, asking if anyone's seen anything suspicious, offering to reduce fines for people who report problems with your property. He's trying to get neighbors to spy on me? Yeah, basically. Most people told him no, but Tom shrugged. I wanted you to know. Whatever you're doing, be careful. Kramer's got connections. People who owe him favors. People who are scared of him. What kind of connections? Tom lowered his voice. There's talk he's connected to some bad dudes. Like criminal bad. I don't know if it's true, but that's the word. After Tom left, David sat on his back porch for a long time, thinking. He'd pushed Kramer, and Kramer was pushing back. The vandalism, the escalating fines, turning the neighborhood against him. It was pressure tactics, and they were only going to get worse. David pulled out his phone and called an old friend from his service days, someone who now worked in federal law enforcement. He explained the situation briefly. Sounds like racketeering, his friend said. Maybe mail fraud too if he's sending those violation notices. Document everything, and when you're ready, we can put you in touch with the right people. How long before I should bring them in? When you have enough that they can't ignore it. And David, watch your back. People running schemes like this don't like being exposed. That night, David could. It was a Saturday afternoon. David was in his garage, organizing tools and trying to enjoy a peaceful weekend. Rachel had taken the kids to the movies. The neighborhood was quiet, just the sound of someone mowing their lawn a few houses down and birds chirping in the trees. Then he heard them. The deep rumble of motorcycle engines getting louder. 6 bikes rolled up his driveway and stopped in a semicircle in front of his garage. Big cruisers, loud pipes, chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. The riders who climbed off matched the bikes. Big men, leather jackets, tattoos visible on their necks and arms. The kind of guys who looked like they'd done time and weren't afraid of going back. The leader was the biggest of them all. Shaved head, a thick scar running down the left side of his face, arms like tree trunks. He had Iron Kings patched on the back of his jacket, and various other patches that David recognized as motorcycle club insignia. Some of those patches had specific meanings in the biker world. This wasn't a weekend riding club. These were real-deal 1%ers. David straightened up from the toolbox he'd been organizing. His heart rate didn't increase. His hands didn't shake. 20 years of training and combat experience had taught him to stay calm when threats appeared. And this was definitely a threat. Can I help you, gentlemen? David kept his voice neutral, polite even. The leader walked forward, his boots heavy on the concrete. He had a way of moving that suggested he'd been in plenty of fights and won most of them. The other 5 spread out slightly, boxing David into the garage. You David Reed? The leader's voice was rough, like gravel in a blender. I am. People call me Razor. We got a mutual friend who thinks you and him need to have a better understanding. David didn't need to ask who the mutual friend was. Kramer sent you. Razor grinned, showing a gold tooth. Smart man. See our friend Kramer, he's been good to us. Does us favors, we do him favors. That's how things work. And what favor are you doing for him today? Making sure you understand how the neighborhood works. See, you've been causing problems. Asking questions, making accusations. Kramer don't like that. Makes him uncomfortable. David glanced at the other 5 bikers. They were watching him with expressions that ranged from bored to eager. The eager ones were the dangerous ones. They wanted an excuse, so you're here to what? Scare me. We're here to help you make the right decisions. Razor stepped closer. You got a pretty wife. 2 kids, right? Jake and Lily. He said the names slowly, deliberately. They go to Oak Ridge Elementary. Jake's in Mrs. Peterson's class. Lily's in Mrs. Chen's. Everything inside David went cold and hard. They just threatened his children. Directly. by name. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. It was subtle, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. His weight distributed differently. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, were now positioned in a way that could respond instantly to movement. "You really want to finish that thought?" David's voice was quiet now, completely calm. Razor didn't pick up on the warning signs. Neither did his crew. They saw a middle-aged suburban dad in a polo shirt and cargo shorts. They had no idea what they were really looking at. "I'm saying," Razor continued, stepping even closer, now just a few feet from David, "that it would be a real shame if something happened to your family. Kids walking home from school, your wife at the grocery store, these things happen. Accidents, you know?" "Last chance," David said softly. "Get on your bikes and leave," Razor laughed. It was a big, mocking laugh that the others joined in on. "Or what, old man? You gonna call the cops? By the time they get here, we'll be gone and you'll be in the hospital." He reached out and shoved David backward hard. It was meant to intimidate, to show dominance, to make David understand his place in the pecking order. It was also the biggest mistake Razor had made in a long time. What happened next took maybe 15 seconds, but it would be replayed on neighborhood security cameras and cell phone videos dozens of times over the next few days. David moved. Not like a suburban dad, not like a regular person who might throw a clumsy punch or tackle someone. He moved like water, like he'd been trained by the absolute best close-quarters combat instructors in the world, because he had been. He caught Razor's arm mid-shove, rotated his body, and used the biker's own momentum against him. Before Razor could process what was happening, he was face first on the concrete driveway with David's knee in his back and his arm twisted at an angle that made him scream. Two of the other bikers rushed forward. They were big guys used to bar fights and street brawls. But David had fought trained soldiers, insurgents, and terrorists in some of the worst hellholes on the planet. The first biker threw a wild haymaker. David released Razor, ducked under the punch, and drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus. The biker folded like a lawn chair, gasping for air. The second one tried to grab David from behind. David dropped his weight, threw his hips back, and sent the man flying over his shoulder onto the hood of the parked car. The remaining three bikers froze. They just watched their president and two brothers get taken down in about 5 seconds by a guy who looked like he should be grilling burgers and coaching Little League. David stood in the center of his garage, barely breathing hard, positioned so he could see all 6 of them. Razor was still on the ground, groaning. The other 2 were hurt but not seriously injured. David had been very careful about that. He'd controlled the level of force precisely. "Here's what's going to happen," David said. His voice had changed completely. It was the voice of command, the voice that had directed teams of operators in combat zones. "You're going to help your friends get up. You're going to get on your bikes, and you're going to leave." One of the remaining bikers, a skinny guy with a snake tattoo on his neck, found his voice. "You're dead, man. You're so dead. Do you know who we are?" "I know exactly who you are." David's eyes were cold. "You're small-time muscle who just made a very big mistake. Now here's what you're going to do next. You're going to call whoever sent you, and you're going to tell them that coming here was a bad idea, that I'm not someone they want to mess with." By now, neighbors had come out of their houses. Several were recording on their phones. Mrs. Patterson from across the street had her phone up. Old Mr. Wilson was standing on his porch watching with wide eyes. Razor was getting to his feet, cradling his arm. His face was red with pain and embarrassment. "Who the hell are you?" David just looked at him. Didn't answer. Didn't need to. The bikers helped their injured friends back to their motorcycles. Razor paused before getting on his bike, looking back at David with an expression that mixed pain, confusion, and something else, fear. "This ain't over," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "Yes, it is," David replied. "Tell Kramer it's over. Tell him to leave my family alone. Tell him that if anyone comes near my wife or my kids, what happened here today will look gentle." The motorcycles roared to life and pulled out of the driveway. David watched them go, still in that state of heightened awareness, making sure they were really leaving. As soon as they were out of sight, he felt the adrenaline start to fade. His hands began to shake slightly. The aftermath of combat stress. It had been years since he'd been in a physical confrontation. He'd hoped those days were behind him. Mrs. Patterson hurried across the street. "David, are you okay?" "I called the police. They're on their way. I'm fine. Thank you." Who were those men? What did they want? David looked at her and the other neighbors who were gathering. They were sent by Kramer to threaten me, to threaten my family. That caused a ripple of shocked murmurs through the growing crowd. "Oh my God," someone said. "Did you see what he did? Where did you learn to fight like that?" Mr. Wilson asked. Before David could answer, he heard more vehicles approaching. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing. 4 officers got out, hands near their weapons, assessing the situation. The lead officer, a sergeant with gray at his temples, approached carefully. "We got a call about a disturbance." "What happened here?" David kept his hands visible and relaxed. 6 men on motorcycles showed up at my house. They made threats against my family. One of them physically assaulted me. I defended myself. It's all on camera. He pointed to his security cameras, and several neighbors recorded it on their phones. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. "Officer, I saw the whole thing. Those bikers attacked him. He was just defending himself." Other neighbors chimed in, confirming the story. The sergeant looked at David more carefully now. "Sir, you took down 3 men by yourself?" "They threw the first punch. I just finished it." "Right." The sergeant didn't look entirely convinced. "Can we see that footage?" David pulled up the security camera feed on his phone and showed it to the sergeant. The video was clear. It showed the bikers arriving, the threats, Razor shoving David, and David's response. The sergeant watched it twice. Then he looked at David with new eyes. "That's some interesting skill set you got there, Mr. Reed. Military?" "Yes, sir." "What branch?" David hesitated just a moment. "Army, Special Operations." The sergeant nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "I see, and these men said they were sent by someone named Kramer?" "Donald Kramer, the HOA president. The HOA sent bikers to threaten you? It's complicated. Can we talk inside?" For the next hour, David explained everything to the police. The police came back Monday morning, but this time it wasn't Sergeant Collins. It was a detective, a woman in her late 30s wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather notebook. She introduced herself as Detective Lisa Morrison from the Major Crimes Unit. "Mr. Reed, can we talk?" she asked. They sat at David's kitchen table. Rachel brought coffee and then took the kids to the backyard to play. Detective Morrison opened her notebook but didn't write anything yet. Instead, she studied David's face. "I've been assigned to investigate the assault at your home," she said. "But before we get into that, I need to ask you something. David Reed, formerly of the Army, served in multiple deployments between 2003 and 2023, correct?" "Yes." "What unit?" David met her eyes. "I can't discuss that." Morrison nodded. "Right, classified, but I did some checking. I worked a joint task force operation about 6 years ago. Interagency thing. There was an Army liaison, didn't say much, observed a lot. His name was David Reed." She paused. "That was you, wasn't it?" David remembered. It had been a domestic terrorism case. He'd been attached to provide insight on tactics and training. "Yes. So when I watched that security footage and saw you take down 3 bikers like they were nothing, it made sense." Morrison leaned forward. "Those weren't just any bikers, Mr. Reed. The Iron Kings are a known criminal organization. Drugs, weapons, extortion. Razor, the man you put on the ground, has done 2 prison stints for assault and 1 for attempted murder. His crew has similar records. I didn't know their backgrounds. I just knew they were threatening my family. And you handled it perfectly. Measured force, nothing excessive, clear self-defense." Morrison flipped a page in her notebook. "Here's the interesting part. We picked up Razor and 2 of his guys this morning. They're facing assault, intimidation, and conspiracy charges." "And Razor?" "He's talking." David raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" "Turns out seeing a suburban dad take apart 3 of your guys really shakes your confidence. Plus, we offered him a deal. He gives us Kramer, we reduce his charges." Morrison smiled slightly. He couldn't talk fast enough. "What did he say?" "That Kramer has been using the Iron Kings for muscle work for about 3 years. Intimidating residents, vandalism, occasionally roughing people up. Kramer pays them in cash and occasionally helps clean up legal problems. It's a nice arrangement, or it was until you came along." Morrison pulled out her phone and showed David several photos. Bank statements, text messages, email records. "Once Razor started talking, we got a warrant for Kramer's records. What we found is interesting. The HOA has been generating about $80,000 a year in violation fines, but only about $35,000 makes it into the official accounts. Where's the rest going?" "Kramer's pocket, mostly. He's been running a side deal. Generate violations, pressure residents to settle in cash for reduced amounts, pocket the money. Never reports it to the HOA or the IRS. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over 6 years. David whistled softly. That's not just HOA abuse. That's fraud. Mail fraud, tax evasion, racketeering, extortion, and now conspiracy to assault. We've also got him for witness intimidation. Morrison closed her notebook. We'll be making arrests today. Kramer and all 4 board members. The board members too. Peterson already flipped. Came in this morning with his lawyer. Apparently your conversation with him really got in his head. He's been keeping secret records for 2 years. Scared of what would happen when this all fell apart. He's giving us everything. David sat back processing this. It was happening faster than he'd expected. What about the residents who lost money? The people he forced out? That's where you come in. We need witness statements from everyone who was victimized. Can you help us compile a list? Already got one. David pulled out a file folder from the drawer. Inside were names, addresses, and summaries of conversations with over 20 residents. I've been documenting everything. Morrison looked through the file, her expression a mix of impressed and amused. You really don't do anything halfway, do you? Learned that in the service. Over the next few hours, David helped Detective Morrison contact residents. Some were scared at first, worried about retaliation, but when they learned Kramer was being arrested, that the police had solid evidence, the floodgates opened. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who'd warned David at the first HOA meeting, came over with her husband. They brought records of every fine they'd received over 12 years. Thousands of dollars for trivial violations. The Johnsons, the young couple with the baby, showed up with a thick folder of violation notices. We were about to lose our house, Mrs. Johnson said, tears in her eyes. We didn't know what to do. Tom, the construction worker from down the street, brought 3 other neighbors who'd all been targeted. Each had similar stories. Excessive fines, threats, pressure to pay cash settlements. By mid-afternoon, Detective Morrison had statements from 15 families. This is more than enough, she said. Combined with Razor's testimony and Peterson's records, Kramer's going away for a long time. As if on cue, David's phone buzzed. It was a message from a neighbor. Police at Kramer's house. They're arresting him. David and Morrison walked out to the street. Half the neighborhood was out now, watching as 3 police cars sat in front of Kramer's large house 4 blocks away. Even from this distance, they could see officers leading Kramer out in handcuffs. The man who'd terrorized this neighborhood, who'd abused his power and threatened families, was being walked to a police car like any common criminal. Because that's what he was. Mrs. Chen stood next to David watching. I can't believe it, she said quietly. For so long we thought there was nothing we could do. There's always something you can do, David said. Sometimes it just takes someone willing to stand up first. Over the next week, the case exploded. Detective Morrison brought in federal investigators when they realized the scope of Kramer's operation. He'd been running similar schemes in 2 other neighborhoods under different HOA management companies he controlled. The total fraud was estimated at over $500,000. The Iron King's connection brought in federal racketeering charges. Kramer had been using the biker gang not just for HOA intimidation, but for other criminal enterprises. It was a whole network that was now unraveling. The local news picked up the story. HOA president arrested in massive fraud scheme was the headline. Reporters came to Oak Ridge Hills. David refused all interviews, but other residents talked. They told stories of harassment, financial ruin, and fear. Peterson, true to his word, provided devastating testimony. He described board meetings where Kramer openly discussed targeting specific residents. He provided email records showing Kramer coordinating with the Iron Kings. He admitted to his own role in approving fraudulent violations, saying he'd been too scared to refuse. The other board members tried to claim ignorance, but Peterson's records proved they'd all known. They'd all benefited. They all went down with Kramer. 2 weeks after the arrests, there was a special HOA meeting. The old board was gone, arrested or resigned. Temporary board members had been appointed by the court to manage the transition. The community room was packed. Every resident seemed to be there. The temporary board president, a retired lawyer named Helen Stokes, addressed the crowd. We're here tonight to discuss the future of this community. The previous board violated your trust and broke the law. We need to rebuild, she outlined a plan. New elections for the board with term limits. New bylaws with oversight and transparency requirements, an independent audit of all HOA finances, and refunds for any residents who'd been fraudulently fined. We also want to recognize someone, Helen said. She looked directly at David. David Reed moved into this neighborhood less than 2 months ago. What he found here was wrong. It was illegal. And instead of moving away or keeping his head down, he fought back. He documented evidence, he protected his family, and he helped bring criminals to justice. The room erupted in applause. David felt his face get hot. He wasn't comfortable with public recognition. Rachel squeezed his hand. We owe you a debt, Helen continued. This neighborhood is free because you refuse to be intimidated. After the meeting, dozens of residents came up to thank David personally. Some were crying. Others just shook his hand. Mrs. Chen hugged him tightly. My husband and I are getting our money back, she said. We're not going to lose our home. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Man, I knew you were tough, but taking down those bikers? That was something else, David smiled. Just wanted to protect my family. You protected all our families. As the crowd dispersed, Detective Morrison approached. Thought you'd want to know. Kramer's lawyer tried to make a deal. Prosecutor said no. He's going to trial, and with everything we have, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. Good. Razor and his crew took plea deals. They're testifying against Kramer and getting reduced sentences. Still going to do time, but not as much. Morrison paused. You know, in all my years as a detective, I've never seen a case come together this fast or this completely. That's because you did half the work before we even got involved. I just documented what was happening. You did more than that. You stood up when others couldn't. You knew how to build a case, and when they sent muscle to scare you off, you showed them they picked the wrong guy. She smiled. 6 months had passed since Kramer's arrest, and Oak Ridge Hills had transformed into the community it was supposed to be. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the neighborhood was gone. People smiled more. Kids played outside later. Neighbors actually talked to each other without the constant fear of being reported for some ridiculous violation. David had become something of a local legend, though he tried to avoid that reputation. Whenever new families moved in, someone would inevitably tell them the story. That's David Reed, they'd whisper. He's the guy who took down the corrupt HOA and fought off a biker gang. Most of the time, David just wanted to be left alone to enjoy his retirement. But he'd learned something important through this whole experience. Communities needed people willing to stand up when things went wrong. And sometimes the skills you learned in one part of your life came in handy in unexpected ways. The new HOA board was everything the old one wasn't. Transparent, fair, and actually concerned with making the neighborhood better, rather than enriching themselves. Helen Stokes had been elected permanent president, and she ran meetings with efficiency and genuine care for residents. At one of the monthly meetings, Helen announced that the HOA had received a settlement from the insurance company that had covered Kramer's management company. The total is $340,000, she said. After legal fees, we'll have enough to refund every fraudulent fine that was ever issued under Kramer's leadership, with some left over for community improvements. The room burst into applause. Mrs. Chen was crying. The Johnsons hugged each other. Years of financial stress were finally being lifted. After the meeting, several residents approached David to thank him again. He'd heard it dozens of times, but he understood why they kept saying it. For many of them, this settlement meant stability, meant keeping their homes, meant not living in fear anymore. You gave us our neighborhood back, Mr. Chen said, shaking David's hand firmly. David was humble about it, as always. You all gave yourselves your neighborhood back. I just helped get the ball rolling. But the truth was more complicated. Without his specific skills, his training, his ability to stand up to physical threats, things might have gone very differently. Sometimes you needed someone who'd faced worse things, who knew how to stay calm under pressure, who understood how to build a case and document evidence. Life had settled into a comfortable pattern. David coached Jake's baseball team, and they were having a good season. Lily had won second place in the science fair with her volcano project. Rachel had started a small business doing freelance graphic design from home. The Mustang in the garage was almost finished, just needed some electrical work. On a warm Saturday morning, David was under the Mustang's hood when he heard a car pull up. He looked up to see Detective Morrison getting out of an unmarked sedan. Detective, this is a surprise. Got a minute? She looked serious. They sat on David's back porch with coffee. Morrison seemed to be choosing her words carefully. The trial's been over for months, David said. What's going on? Kramer's appeals were all denied. He's in federal prison and he's going to stay there. But the investigation opened up some other cases. Turns out he was part of a bigger network, property management fraud across 3 states. We've made 14 more arrests in the last month. That's good news. It is, and it happened because you refused to back down. Morrison set down her coffee cup. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to tell you something. During the investigation, I had to look into your background pretty thoroughly. Had to verify who you were, make sure your story checked out. David felt a slight tension. His military service was largely classified. I couldn't get details, Morrison continued. Your file is locked down tight, but I got enough clearance to know what unit you were in, what you did. She looked at him with new understanding. 20 years in Delta Force, multiple deployments. Commendations I can't even read about. David didn't confirm or deny. Some things remained classified even in retirement. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I understand what you gave up, Morrison said. Most people have no idea. They think you were just regular Army, but you were the tip of the spear. You did things most people can't imagine, in places most people have never heard of, fighting enemies that would have terrified normal civilians. I did my job. You did more than that. And then you came home, hung up your uniform, and thought you'd left all that behind. But when your family was threatened, when your community needed someone who knew how to fight back, you were ready. Morrison smiled. Those bikers had no idea. They thought they were intimidating some suburban dad. They had no clue they were threatening a man who'd faced down some of the most dangerous people on the planet. They learned quick that they did. Morrison stood up. Anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did here, but for your service. People like you keep people like me safe. Keep all of us safe. David walked her to her car. Before she left, she turned back. One more thing. The FBI agent you contacted, the one from your service days?
He called me.
Said if you ever needed anything to let him know. Said the community owes you more than it knows. After Morrison left, David sat on his porch for a while thinking. He'd spent 20 years in the shadows, doing things he could never talk about, protecting people who would never know his name. He'd thought retirement would be about leaving all that behind. But you never really left it behind. The training, the instincts, the willingness to stand up against threats that stayed with you. It was part of who you were. Rachel came out and sat next to him. Everything okay? I saw the detective. Yeah. Just closing some final details on the case. Rachel studied his face. After 15 years of marriage, she could read him pretty well. You're thinking about the old days. A little. Any regrets? David thought about it. No, I did what I had to do back then. And I did what I had to do here. Different mission, same goal. Protect the people who can't protect themselves. My hero, Rachel said with a smile that was only half teasing. I'm no hero. I just didn't like being pushed around. You're a hero to this neighborhood, to those families who got their money back, to Mrs. Chen who gets to stay in her home. Rachel took his hand. And you're a hero to me and the kids. We're safe because of you. That afternoon, the neighborhood was having a block party. It was supposed to be a celebration of the new HOA and the settlement, but it turned into something more. A celebration of community, of standing together, of overcoming fear. Someone had set up a grill. Kids were running through sprinklers. Music was playing. It was exactly the kind of peaceful, normal suburban scene David had dreamed about during his years of service. Tom came over with a plate of burgers. Your family settling in okay? Better than okay. This is what home is supposed to feel like. You know, we were talking about putting up a plaque. In the community center, something about standing up for what's right. Wanted to mention you by name. David shook his head firmly. No plaques. No recognition. I just did what anyone should do. But not everyone would do it. That's the point. Then make it about the community standing together. About not letting fear win, but leave my name off it. Tom nodded, understanding. Okay, but people are still going to remember. They're going to tell the story. Let them tell it however they want. As long as the lesson is that ordinary people can stand up to bullies, even powerful ones, then it's worth it. As the party continued, David watched his kids playing with other neighborhood kids. Jake was teaching some younger boys how to throw a curveball. Lily was showing off her science fair project to a group of interested parents. Rachel was laughing with other moms, already becoming part of the neighborhood's social fabric. This was what he'd fought for, both overseas and here at home. Not glory or recognition, just the simple right to live peacefully, to raise your family without fear, to have a community that worked together instead of being terrorized by people in power. An elderly man David didn't know well approached him. "Mr. Reed? I'm Frank Patterson. I live over on Maple Street. Nice to meet you. I wanted to thank you. My wife and we were targeted by Kramer pretty bad. We're both on fixed incomes and those fines nearly bankrupted us. We were talking about moving in with our daughter, giving up our home." His voice cracked slightly. "The settlement money means we can stay. We can afford to fix our roof now and get my wife's medication. You gave us our life back." David shook his hand, moved by the man's sincerity. "I'm glad I could help. You did more than help. You showed us that good people can still win." After Frank walked away, David stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of what had happened. Not just the fight with the bikers or taking down Kramer, but the impact. The real human impact on families like the Pattersons, like the Chens, like so many others. As the sun started to set, the party began to wind down. Families packed up their things, said their goodbyes, headed back to their homes. David helped clean up, folding chairs and collecting trash. Helen Stokes came over carrying a stack of paper plates. "David, I want to say something and I want you to hear it. This community was broken. We were scared, divided, and being exploited. You didn't just expose Kramer. You reminded us what community is supposed to be. People looking out for each other,